Hey there, curious minds. Today we're connecting two dots that history really doesn't want you to connect. A broke Serbian genius who died alone in a New York hotel room, and a 4,000-year-old pile of rocks in Egypt that we're still pretending was just a fancy coffin for some dead guy. Spoiler alert, they were working on the exact same thing. And no, I'm not talking about really impressive paperweights. Here's the deal. What if I told you that Nikola Tesla didn't invent wireless energy transmission? What if he just rediscovered it? Thousands of years after someone else already cracked the code, built the machine, and then watched it all burn down. The Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb. Tesla's tower wasn't a failure. They were both power plants. And they were both destroyed for the same reason. Because free energy is really bad for business. So buckle up, because today we're going full tinfoil hat. Except our tinfoil is peer-reviewed science, and some very uncomfortable questions. Before we dive in, smash that like button if you're ready to have your mind bent, and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from right now? I want to know how far this rabbit hole reaches. Let's go. Now let's talk about what we're actually dealing with here, because I think most people genuinely have no idea. When someone says Great Pyramid, your brain probably conjures up some dusty triangle in the desert, maybe with a camel standing nearby looking unimpressed. Tourist trap, right? Ancient tomb, Pharaoh's ego project, a really inconvenient place to store one dead guy. Well, prepare to have that mental image absolutely demolished. Because the more you look at the engineering specs of this thing, the more your brain starts screaming that something doesn't add up. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains approximately 2.5 million stone blocks. Let that number sink in for a second. 2.5 million. That's not a typo. That's not me being dramatic. That's the actual count. Each of these blocks weighs somewhere between 2 and 15 tons on average, with some of the really special ones in the internal chambers tipping the scales at 50 to 80 tons. For context, your average sedan weighs about 1.5 tons. So we're talking about stones that weigh as much as 50 cars, somehow lifted and placed with surgical precision by people who allegedly hadn't even invented the wheel yet. Naturally, historians assure us they did this with copper tools and really strong feelings about the afterlife. Nothing suspicious there. But here's where it gets truly weird. These 2.5 million blocks aren't just piled up like some ancient game of Jenga. They're aligned to true north with an accuracy of 1/15 of a degree. To put that in perspective, the Paris Observatory, built in the 17th century with all the astronomical knowledge and precision instruments of the Enlightenment, is less accurately aligned to true north than a building constructed over 4,000 years ago. Let me repeat that. A building from the Bronze Age is more precisely oriented than structures built with telescopes, mathematical calculations, and centuries of accumulated scientific knowledge. Either the ancient Egyptians were absolute wizards with a stick and some string, or something else is going on here that we're not being told about. The base of the pyramid spans about 13 acres. That's roughly the size of 10 football fields, which is already absurd for a building constructed without cranes, trucks, or even basic iron tools. But the really mind-bending part isn't the size, it's the levelness. The entire base deviates from a perfectly flat plane by less than 2 centimeters across its entire length. 2 centimeters. Over an area of 13 acres. Modern construction engineers will tell you that achieving that level of precision today requires laser-guided equipment, computer modeling, and teams of highly trained specialists with degrees they're still paying off. The pyramid builders apparently achieved it with, well, we don't actually know. The official explanation involves water channels and extreme patience, but that's a bit like explaining how someone won the lottery by saying they bought a ticket. Technically true, spectacularly incomplete. Now, if you're building a tomb, just a fancy box to store a dead king and his collection of golden furniture, why on earth would you need this level of precision? The pharaoh's not going to wake up and complain that the floor is slightly uneven. His furniture isn't going to wobble. There's literally no practical reason to align a burial chamber to true north with astronomical accuracy, or to level a foundation to within 2 centimeters across 13 acres. It's like hiring a Formula One pit crew to change the tires on a car that's never going to move again. Impressive? Absolutely. Necessary? Not even remotely. Unless, of course, the building wasn't a tomb at all. Unless it was something that actually required this insane level of precision to function correctly. And speaking of unnecessary precision, let's talk about the dimensions themselves, because this is where things start getting genuinely spooky. The perimeter of the pyramid's base, divided by twice its height, gives you pi accurate to several decimal places. The height of the pyramid, multiplied by a specific factor, gives you the distance from Earth to the Sun. The ratio of the base perimeter to the height equals 2 pi with remarkable accuracy. Now, mainstream archaeology will tell you these are all coincidences, happy accidents. The ancient Egyptians just happened to stumble onto these mathematical constants while building their royal refrigerator for dead people. And sure, one coincidence is believable. 2 coincidences are suspicious. But when you start stacking up coincidence after coincidence, at some point you have to admit that maybe, just maybe, these people knew exactly what they were doing. Here's one that really messes with people. If you take the original height of the pyramid in its completed state, about 146 meters before erosion and theft reduced it, and you multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of Earth. The polar radius, as in the distance from the center of the planet to the poles. The ancient Egyptians supposedly didn't know the Earth was round, let alone its exact dimensions. They were allegedly working with flat Earth cosmology and a profound ignorance of planetary geometry. Yet somehow, by pure coincidence, they built a structure whose dimensions encode the size of the planet, with an accuracy of about 99.3%. At this point, calling it coincidence isn't skepticism, it's denial. The same pattern holds for Earth's circumference. The base perimeter of the pyramid multiplied by a specific number gives you the circumference of the planet at the equator. Again, 99% plus accuracy. Again, supposedly by accident. The pyramid also sits almost exactly at the center of Earth's landmass. Not the geographic center, but the point where the most land is visible in every direction. If you were trying to build a structure that needed to interact with the planet's electromagnetic field or transmit energy globally, this is exactly where you'd put it. But no, we're assured, it's just a tomb. The world's most precisely engineered, mathematically sophisticated, geographically optimized tomb. For one guy, who was dead. Let's zoom in a bit and look at the internal chambers, because the precision only gets more ridiculous the closer you look. The king's chamber, deep inside the pyramid, is constructed from massive granite blocks, some weighing upwards of 50 tons. These blocks were quarried in Aswan, about 500 miles to the south, and transported to Giza without modern roads, vehicles, or any technology that could reasonably explain how you move 50-ton stones across a desert. But forget the logistics for a moment. Look at the craftsmanship. The granite blocks are fitted together so precisely that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. The corners are perfect right angles. The surfaces are flat to within fractions of a millimeter. Modern masons, using diamond-tipped cutting tools, would struggle to achieve this level of finish. Yet we're supposed to believe it was done with copper chisels and elbow grease. Copper, by the way, is softer than granite. Trying to cut granite with copper is like trying to slice a steak with a banana. You'll get tired long before you make progress. The so-called sarcophagus in the king's chamber is another engineering anomaly that doesn't get nearly enough attention. It's carved from a single block of granite, not assembled from pieces but hollowed out from one massive chunk of stone. The interior corners are sharp right angles, which is essentially impossible to achieve with hand tools on a material as hard as granite. The walls of the box are of uniform thickness throughout. And here's the kicker. The sarcophagus is slightly too large to fit through the passage leading into the chamber. This means it was placed inside before the chamber was sealed, which means the builders planned the entire construction around this specific object. That's not how you build a tomb. That's how you build a machine, where every component must be in place before the system can function. The Grand Gallery is perhaps the most architecturally stunning, and most baffling, space in the entire structure. It's a corbelled hallway nearly 50 meters long and 8 meters high, with walls that angle inward as they rise. The acoustics in this space are extraordinary. Sounds resonate and amplify in ways that modern architects struggle to replicate. The walls feature regular notches and slots whose purpose remains officially unknown. If you're building a simple corridor to a burial chamber, you don't need cathedral-level acoustics and mysterious mounting points along the walls. But if you're building something that needs to manipulate sound waves or hold equipment in precise positions, suddenly all of this makes perfect sense. There's also the question of the shafts. The King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber both feature narrow shafts that extend from the rooms and angle upward through the body of the pyramid. For decades, these were explained as ventilation shafts or symbolic passages for the pharaoh's soul. The ventilation theory fell apart when researchers discovered that the shafts don't actually reach the exterior of the pyramid. They stop just short of the surface or terminate in blocking stones. The soul passage theory is unfalsifiable mysticism, which is historian speak for "we have no idea." What we do know is that these shafts are angled with extreme precision toward specific star positions, Orion's belt, Sirius, and other astronomically significant points. If you're building a power plant that needs to interact with cosmic energy or align with specific electromagnetic frequencies, stellar alignment would be crucial. If you're building a tomb, it's irrelevant. Let me throw one more number at you, because I know you're still thinking this might all be coincidence. The speed of light is approximately 299,792,458 meters per second. The latitude of the Great Pyramid's exact center is 29.9792458 degrees north. Those numbers are essentially identical. The latitude of the pyramid encodes the speed of light. Now, the ancient Egyptians didn't use meters. That's a modern unit. And they certainly didn't measure the speed of light. That required technology that wouldn't exist for thousands of years. So either this is the most spectacular coincidence in human history, or someone involved in positioning this structure knew things that conventional history says they couldn't possibly have known. At this point, a reasonable person has to ask, what is actually going on here? The official explanation, that the pyramid is a tomb built by Bronze Age workers with primitive tools, requires you to believe an almost endless string of impossibilities. It requires you to believe that people without wheels moved millions of multi-ton stones, that people without iron cut and shaped granite with surgical precision, that people without mathematics encoded advanced mathematical constants into their architecture by accident, that people without astronomy built structures aligned to stars and planetary dimensions, that people without any apparent reason constructed a building with tolerances that would challenge modern engineering just to store a corpse. The alternative explanation, that the pyramid was built as a functional device, a machine of some kind, suddenly makes the engineering make sense. Precision matters when you're building something that needs to work. Alignment matters when you're interacting with electromagnetic fields or resonant frequencies. Mathematical encoding matters when dimensions affect functionality. Materials matter when you need specific electrical or acoustic properties. Everything about the pyramid screams machine. Everything about the official explanation screams, we don't know and we're not curious. The ancient builders, whoever they were, weren't showing off. They weren't padding their resumes or trying to impress future tourists. Every ounce of precision, every perfectly placed block, every carefully chosen material, it was all there for a reason, a functional reason. The pyramid wasn't built to be impressive. It was built to do something. And the fact that we've spent centuries refusing to ask what that something might be says more about us than it does about them. So when we talk about the Great Pyramid as a power plant, we're not starting from some wild speculation and working backward. We're starting from the evidence, the impossible precision, the encoded mathematics, the inexplicable engineering, and asking the obvious question that mainstream archaeology refuses to ask. What if all of this precision was necessary? What if the pyramid worked? The evidence is literally carved in stone, 2.5 million blocks of it, waiting for us to finally take it seriously. So we've established that the Great Pyramid is an engineering impossibility wrapped in a mathematical enigma, all conveniently labeled as a glorified storage unit for one particularly important corpse. But here's where things get really interesting, because we haven't even talked about what this thing is actually made of. And I don't mean rocks. I mean the specific types of rocks, chosen with what appears to be an almost obsessive understanding of their electrical properties. Because when you start looking at the materials the builders selected, the "it's just a tomb" explanation doesn't just fall apart, it spontaneously combusts. The pyramid isn't built from random stones that happen to be lying around. It's constructed from 3 distinct types of material, each with fundamentally different electrical characteristics, arranged in a very specific configuration. This is the point where coincidence stops being a reasonable explanation and starts being willful ignorance. The ancient builders selected materials the way an electrical engineer would, not the way a Bronze Age construction crew looking for heavy objects would. Let's start with the outside. The Great Pyramid was originally covered in a smooth outer casing of white Tura limestone, quarried from across the Nile and transported to the Giza Plateau. Today, most of this casing is gone, stripped away over centuries by locals who needed building materials and apparently had no qualms about dismantling a wonder of the world for their garden walls. But when the pyramid was new, it was completely sheathed in this polished white stone, so smooth and reflective that ancient writers described it as gleaming like a jewel in the desert sun. From a distance, it would have appeared almost luminous, a beacon visible for miles. Very pretty, very dramatic. Also, as it turns out, very electrically significant. Tura limestone is an excellent electrical insulator. If you wanted to wrap something in a material that prevents electrical current from escaping, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better natural option. It's essentially nature's version of the rubber coating on an electrical wire. It keeps the energy contained, prevents leakage, and ensures that whatever's happening inside stays inside. Now, if you're building a tomb, insulating properties are completely irrelevant. Dead pharaohs don't generate electricity, and their gold trinkets don't need to be protected from current leakage. But if you're building a device that generates or contains electrical energy, suddenly wrapping the entire thing in a natural insulator makes perfect sense. Beneath that insulating shell, the bulk of the pyramid consists of local limestone blocks, the roughly 2.5 million pieces we discussed earlier. This limestone is slightly more conductive than the Tura casing, but still relatively poor at transmitting electricity. It serves as the structural mass of the pyramid, the bulk that gives it shape and stability. Think of it as the body of the machine, necessary for structure, but not where the interesting electrical action happens. The interesting electrical action happens in the interior chambers, and this is where the material selection gets genuinely suspicious. The King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Grand Gallery are all constructed from a completely different material, red granite, specifically sourced from Aswan, about 500 miles to the south. Now, transporting massive granite blocks 500 miles without trucks, trains, or even paved roads is already absurd enough. But the builders didn't go through all that trouble because granite is pretty. They went through all that trouble because granite is special. Red Aswan granite is composed of approximately 55 to 85% quartz, depending on the specific sample. That's not a minor component. That's the majority of the stone's composition. And quartz, my friends, is not just any mineral. Quartz is piezoelectric. This is where things get genuinely exciting, so pay attention, because this is the key that unlocks the entire theory. Piezoelectricity is a real, well-documented, scientifically proven phenomenon. It was formally discovered by Jacques and Pierre Curie in 1880, though the effect obviously existed long before French scientists got around to naming it. The basic principle is simple. When you apply mechanical pressure to certain crystalline materials, quartz being the most famous example, the crystal generates an electrical charge. Squeeze the crystal, electricity comes out. Stop squeezing, the electricity stops. It's like a battery that recharges itself every time you apply pressure. The word piezo comes from the Greek word for press or squeeze, which tells you everything you need to know about how it works. You've almost certainly used piezoelectric technology today without realizing it. That clicking igniter on your barbecue grill? Piezoelectric. The spark comes from a small quartz crystal being struck by a hammer mechanism. Your quartz wristwatch? Piezoelectric. The crystal vibrates at a precise frequency when electricity is applied, and that vibration keeps perfect time. Ultrasound machines, microphones, speakers, sensors in your smartphone, all of these rely on piezoelectric materials to convert mechanical energy into electrical energy, or vice versa. It's not fringe science, it's not speculation. It's basic physics that we use every single day. Now here's where the pyramid comes in. The King's Chamber is constructed entirely from massive granite blocks, stacked in multiple layers above the chamber itself. We're talking about thousands of tons of granite, all pressing down on the chamber below. That granite is majority quartz. Quartz is piezoelectric. Thousands of tons of constant pressure means thousands of tons of constant squeeze. Do you see where this is going? The granite blocks in the pyramid are under perpetual mechanical stress. The sheer weight of the structure above them creates continuous compression. And because those blocks are largely composed of quartz crystal, that continuous compression generates a continuous electrical charge. The pyramid, simply by existing and being heavy, is constantly producing electricity. It's not a battery that runs out. It's not a generator that needs fuel. It's a structure that produces electrical energy as a natural consequence of its own mass pressing down on piezoelectric stone. The bigger and heavier the pyramid, the more electricity it generates. Suddenly, building something absolutely massive starts to look less like pharaonic ego and more like engineering optimization. But wait, it gets better. Static pressure is one thing. The weight isn't going anywhere, so you get a steady baseline of electrical generation. But what if you could add dynamic pressure? What if something was constantly vibrating and squeezing those quartz-rich stones in rhythmic pulses? You'd get fluctuating electrical charges, oscillating currents, something much more useful than a steady trickle. And as it happens, the pyramid sits directly above something that provides exactly that kind of dynamic pressure. The Giza Plateau is positioned over substantial underground aquifers, layers of porous rock saturated with flowing water. This isn't speculation. Geologists have confirmed the presence of these water tables beneath the pyramids. Water in aquifers doesn't sit still. It moves. It flows through channels and cavities in the rock, creating vibrations as it goes. These vibrations propagate upward through the bedrock and into the pyramid above. The flowing water essentially turns the pyramid into a giant tuning fork, constantly being struck by low-frequency vibrations from below. When those vibrations hit the granite blocks in the internal chambers, they cause the quartz crystals to oscillate, to compress and release, over and over again. Each compression generates a burst of electrical charge. Each release allows the crystal to reset for the next compression. The result is a pulsing, rhythmic generation of electricity, synchronized to the natural vibrations of the Earth itself. The pyramid isn't just sitting there being heavy. It's actively harvesting energy from groundwater movement, converting mechanical vibration into electrical current through the piezoelectric effect. Modern engineers use this exact principle in energy harvesting systems. There are experimental projects that generate electricity from footsteps on piezoelectric floor tiles, from vibrations in bridges and buildings, from the mechanical stress of waves hitting coastal structures. The technology is real. The physics is proven. The only controversial claim here is that someone figured this out thousands of years before we did, and built a 6-million-ton machine to exploit it. Let's think about the design implications for a moment. If you wanted to maximize piezoelectric energy generation, what would you do? First, you'd use materials with high quartz content in the areas where you want electricity generated. Check, the internal chambers are all granite. Second, you'd put those materials under maximum pressure. Check, the chambers are buried deep within millions of tons of stone. Third, you'd locate your structure over a source of continuous vibration. Check, the Giza Plateau sits above active aquifers. Fourth, you'd wrap the whole thing in an insulating material to contain the generated charge. Check, the Tura limestone casing was an excellent electrical insulator. The pyramid, viewed through this lens, isn't a random pile of rocks arranged into a pleasing shape. It's a carefully designed system, with specific materials in specific locations, optimized for a specific purpose. The granite goes inside where you need conductivity and piezoelectric generation. The insulating limestone goes outside where you need containment. The whole thing sits on top of flowing water that provides the vibrational input. Every element has a function. Every material has a role. This is engineering, not architecture. And here's a fun detail that doesn't get mentioned often enough. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with granite. They went to absolutely absurd lengths to obtain it, carving obelisks from single blocks weighing hundreds of tons, polishing it to mirror finishes, transporting it vast distances at incredible expense and effort. Mainstream archaeology explains this as aesthetic preference. They just thought granite was pretty. But granite isn't even particularly beautiful compared to other stones. Marble is arguably more visually striking. Alabaster glows when backlit. Granite is fine. It's serviceable. It's not worth organizing massive labor forces and engineering miracles just because it's nice to look at. Unless, of course, it wasn't about looks. Unless the ancient Egyptians knew something about granite's unique properties that we've only rediscovered in the past century and a half. Unless their obsession with quartz-rich stone was functional, not decorative. Suddenly, all those elaborate granite works, the pyramid chambers, the obelisks, the massive temple columns, start looking less like ancient interior design choices and more like a civilization-wide infrastructure project based on piezoelectric technology. Consider this. The obelisks that the Egyptians placed throughout their kingdom were almost all made of granite. They were positioned at temples, at city centers, at points of apparent religious significance. Mainstream interpretation says they were solar symbols, representations of sun rays frozen in stone. But granite obelisks, pointed at the sky, positioned at specific locations, all made from the same piezoelectric material. That sounds less like sun worship and more like a network of energy transmission points. We'll get into that possibility later, but for now, just note that the material choice was remarkably consistent across very different structures spread across vast distances. The internal layout of the pyramid also makes more sense when you consider piezoelectric function. The king's chamber isn't just randomly placed somewhere inside the structure. It's positioned at a specific height, surrounded by a specific arrangement of granite beams and relieving chambers above it. These so-called relieving chambers have always puzzled archaeologists. The official explanation is that they exist to reduce the weight pressing down on the king's chamber below, preventing the ceiling from collapsing. But the math doesn't really work. The chamber would be fine without them. Other ancient structures supported far greater loads without such elaborate overhead architecture. However, if those relieving chambers aren't about relieving weight, but about creating layered piezoelectric zones, suddenly they make perfect sense. Multiple layers of granite, each under slightly different pressure, each generating its own electrical field. You've essentially got a multi-stage generator, with each layer contributing to the total electrical output. The chambers above the king's chamber aren't protective, they're functional. They're part of the machine. We should also talk about the specific type of granite used. Aswan granite isn't just any granite. It's particularly rich in quartz, but it also contains significant amounts of feldspar and mica. Mica is interesting because it's also piezoelectric, though less dramatically so than quartz. More importantly, mica is an excellent electrical insulator within its own structure while being part of a conductive matrix. The combination of quartz for generation and mica for internal regulation suggests a sophisticated understanding of how to balance and control electrical flow within a composite material. These aren't random rocks. These are carefully selected components with complementary electrical properties. The granite blocks in the king's chamber also show evidence of being worked with extraordinary precision, as we discussed earlier. But here's something additional. They appear to have been selected and placed with attention to their crystal grain orientation. In piezoelectric materials, the direction of the crystal structure affects the direction and efficiency of electrical generation. Modern piezoelectric devices are carefully manufactured with controlled crystal orientation to maximize their effectiveness. The evidence suggests the pyramid builders may have been doing the same thing 4,000 years ago, selecting and positioning their granite blocks to optimize piezoelectric output. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, so the pyramid could theoretically generate electricity through piezoelectric effects. That's interesting. But how much electricity are we actually talking about? Is this a trickle that could power a flashlight, or something more significant? The honest answer is, we don't know, because no one has been allowed to conduct proper experiments inside the pyramid to measure this directly. The Egyptian government is, unsurprisingly, not eager to have researchers drilling sensors into their most famous monument to test alternative theories about its function. But we can make some educated estimates based on the known properties of piezoelectric materials and the known conditions inside the pyramid. The king's chamber alone contains approximately 1,200 tons of granite. If even a small percentage of this mass is actively contributing to piezoelectric generation under the constant pressure and vibration of the structure, we're potentially talking about significant power output. Add in the granite beams, the relieving chambers, and any other piezoelectric materials distributed throughout the structure, and the total could be substantial. Not enough to power a modern city, probably, but enough to do something useful? Absolutely. The real question isn't whether the pyramid generates electricity. The physics basically guarantees that it does, at least to some degree. The real question is whether it generates enough electricity to matter, and whether the ancient builders designed the structure specifically to harness and use that electricity. Based on the evidence we've seen, the precise material selection, the strategic placement of granite, the positioning over aquifers, the insulating casing, it's hard to argue they weren't at least trying. Whether they succeeded, and what they did with the power if they did, is what we'll explore in the chapters ahead. For now, just sit with this. The Great Pyramid is essentially a giant battery that never runs out. It converts the weight of millions of tons of stone and the vibrations of underground water into electrical energy, using the same piezoelectric principle that powers your wristwatch and your barbecue lighter. The technology isn't magic. It's not speculation. It's physics. Physics that the ancient builders appear to have understood and exploited on a scale we can barely comprehend. And we've spent 4,000 years calling it a tomb. So we've got a 6-million-ton structure made of carefully selected piezoelectric materials, wrapped in natural insulation, positioned with astronomical precision, and encoding mathematical constants that supposedly hadn't been discovered yet. At this point, you might be thinking the ancient builders were just showing off, flexing their engineering muscles for posterity. But here's the thing about machines. They need input. A generator doesn't run on good intentions. Even the most elegant design is just an expensive sculpture unless something actually powers it. So where did the pyramid get its energy input? The answer is beneath your feet, literally. The Earth itself was the power source, and the pyramid was built to harvest it. Let's go underground for a moment, because there's an entire layer of this story that most people never hear about. Beneath the Giza Plateau, far below the pyramid's foundation, lie extensive aquifers, underground layers of porous rock saturated with water. These aren't stagnant pools sitting quietly in the dark. These are active hydrological systems, with water constantly flowing through channels and cavities in the bedrock. The Nile River, which flows just a few miles away, feeds these underground reservoirs, creating a perpetual circulation of water beneath the desert surface. The ancient Egyptians knew about this water. They dug wells that tapped into it, and their agriculture depended on understanding the Nile's annual flooding patterns. But did they also understand what that flowing water could do? When water moves through underground channels, it creates vibrations. This is basic physics, fluid dynamics in action. The movement of millions of gallons of water through stone corridors generates low-frequency sound waves that propagate through the surrounding rock. These vibrations are too low for human ears to detect directly, but they're absolutely real and measurable with modern instruments. The Earth, in a very literal sense, is humming. It's a constant, planetary-scale vibration created by countless sources: water movement, tectonic activity, atmospheric pressure changes, even the solar wind interacting with our magnetosphere. And the pyramid, it appears, was specifically designed to tune in to this hum. Here's where we need to talk about something called Schumann resonance, because this is crucial to understanding how the pyramid might have functioned. In 1952, a German physicist named Winfried Otto Schumann mathematically predicted that the cavity between Earth's surface and the ionosphere, the electrically charged layer of our upper atmosphere, would act as a resonant chamber for electromagnetic waves. He calculated that this cavity would naturally resonate at specific frequencies, with the fundamental frequency being approximately 7.83 Hz. Subsequent measurements confirmed his prediction exactly. The Earth literally has a heartbeat, an electromagnetic pulse that oscillates at about 8 cycles per second, and it's been doing this for as long as there's been an atmosphere. Now, 7.83 Hz might not sound like much. It's way below the range of human hearing, which starts around 20 Hz. You can't hear Schumann resonance any more than you can hear a whale song from the other side of the planet. But just because you can't hear something doesn't mean it isn't there, and doesn't mean it can't be harnessed. Modern research has shown that Schumann resonance affects everything from human brain waves to global weather patterns. It's a fundamental rhythm of our planet, a constant electromagnetic pulse that permeates everything on Earth's surface. And the pyramid, remarkably, appears to have been tuned to interact with it. The subterranean chamber is arguably the most mysterious and least discussed part of the pyramid's internal structure. It's carved directly into the bedrock beneath the pyramid's base, accessible only through a long, narrow, descending passage. Unlike the polished chambers above, the subterranean chamber appears unfinished. Rough walls, uneven floor, a strange pit in one corner that leads nowhere obvious. Mainstream archaeology dismisses it as an abandoned project, a mistake that the builders started and then gave up on. The official story is that the pharaoh changed his mind about where he wanted to be buried, so they just stopped working on this lower chamber and built new ones higher up. Very convenient explanation. Also, makes absolutely no sense when you actually think about it. If you're a pharaoh planning your eternal resting place, you don't start digging and then casually decide, actually, let's put my immortal soul somewhere else. The logistics of building a pyramid are so complex, the planning so extensive, that the idea of a casual, mid-project redesign is laughable. Every block was planned. Every passage was calculated. You don't accidentally dig a massive chamber into bedrock and then forget about it. Unless, of course, the chamber was never meant to be finished in the traditional sense. Unless its rough, irregular surfaces were intentional, designed to scatter and amplify sound waves rather than reflect them cleanly. Acoustic engineers who've studied the subterranean chamber have noted that its irregular shape would function exceptionally well as a resonance amplifier for very low frequencies. The rough walls break up standing waves that would otherwise cancel each other out, while the overall geometry focuses and intensifies incoming vibrations. If you wanted to build a chamber specifically to capture and amplify the low-frequency vibrations coming from underground water movement, to tune into the Earth's natural hum and boost its signal, this is almost exactly what you'd design. The unfinished chamber might actually be perfectly finished for its intended purpose. Here's how the system might have worked. Water flowing through the aquifers beneath Giza creates constant low-frequency vibrations. These vibrations travel upward through the bedrock and into the subterranean chamber, where they are amplified by the chamber's acoustic properties. The amplified vibrations then propagate up through the body of the pyramid, causing the granite blocks in the upper chambers to oscillate. Remember piezoelectricity? Those oscillating granite blocks, full of quartz crystal, convert the mechanical vibration into electrical charge. The Earth's own movement becomes electricity. The pyramid is essentially a giant antenna, tuned to receive the planet's natural frequency and convert it into usable power. But wait, we're not done yet, because the pyramid doesn't just passively receive energy. There's evidence it actively generated its own chemical reactions to boost the process. And this brings us to one of the most controversial and fascinating parts of the whole theory. The Queen's Chamber and its apparent function as a chemical laboratory. The Queen's Chamber sits in the heart of the pyramid, connected to the Grand Gallery by a horizontal passage. Despite its name, there's no evidence any queen was ever buried here. The name is a 19th century invention based on Arab tradition, not archaeological fact. The chamber is notable for several features that make no sense in a burial context, but make perfect sense in an industrial one. Most importantly, it has two narrow shafts extending from its north and south walls, similar to those in the king's chamber above, but with a crucial difference. These shafts don't extend all the way to the exterior. They stop short, terminating in small chambers or blockages within the pyramid's mass. For years, these blocked shafts were a mystery. Why build shafts that don't go anywhere? The ventilation theory obviously doesn't work. You can't ventilate with a sealed tube. The soul passage theory doesn't work either. What kind of spiritual journey ends in a brick wall? But here's where chemical analysis starts telling a very different story. Researchers examining the Queen's Chamber shafts discovered chemical residues that had no business being there. On the walls and in the niches of these shafts, they found traces of hydrochloric acid. Yes, the same corrosive acid used in laboratories and industrial processes today. They also found residues consistent with hydrated zinc chloride, another reactive chemical compound. Now, hydrochloric acid and zinc chloride don't occur naturally in limestone or granite. They're not something that would accumulate over time through normal geological processes. They had to be placed there deliberately. Here's what's really interesting. When you combine hydrochloric acid with zinc chloride in the presence of zinc metal, you get a vigorous chemical reaction that produces large quantities of hydrogen gas. Hydrogen, as you might remember from high school chemistry, or from news coverage of various spectacular explosions, is the lightest element in the universe and extremely reactive. It's also an excellent fuel. Modern hydrogen fuel cells are considered one of the most promising clean energy technologies, and hydrogen was the lifting gas used in early airships before everyone realized that extremely flammable and flying over cities was a problematic combination. The theory goes like this. The Queen's Chamber functioned as a chemical reactor. Zinc chloride solution would be introduced through one shaft, hydrochloric acid through the other. The two chemicals would mix in the chamber, reacting to produce massive amounts of hydrogen gas. This hydrogen would then rise, because hydrogen is lighter than air and naturally ascends, up through the pyramid's internal passages toward the Grand Gallery above. But why would you want hydrogen gas filling your pyramid? Several reasons, all of them related to energy generation. First, hydrogen under pressure would push against the granite walls of the Grand Gallery, adding to the mechanical stress on those piezoelectric blocks and increasing their electrical output. Second, hydrogen is an excellent conductor of certain types of energy and could have served as a transmission medium. Third, and this is where things get really speculative but really interesting, hydrogen atoms can be excited by specific frequencies of sound or electromagnetic energy, causing them to release energy of their own. The Grand Gallery, with its remarkable acoustic properties, might have been designed to excite the hydrogen gas with sound waves, triggering additional energy release. Speaking of the Grand Gallery's acoustics, researchers have measured its resonant frequency and found something remarkable. The gallery naturally resonates at approximately 440 Hz. If that number sounds familiar, it should. 440 Hz is the standard tuning frequency for musical instruments worldwide. It's the A above middle C, the note that orchestras use to tune before performances. The Grand Gallery, this ancient stone corridor, just happens to resonate at the exact frequency that modern musicians have identified as the most harmonically significant note in the musical scale. Coincidence? At this point, I've lost count of how many coincidences we're supposed to believe in. The gallery also features 27 pairs of regularly spaced notches along its walls, slots that appear designed to hold something. Mainstream archaeology calls these construction features, or suggests they held wooden beams for construction scaffolding. But the spacing and precision of these notches is remarkable, and they would function perfectly as mounting points for resonators, devices designed to vibrate at specific frequencies and amplify sound waves. If you lined the Grand Gallery with tuned resonators, all vibrating in harmony, you'd create an incredibly powerful acoustic environment. Sound waves would reinforce each other, building in intensity, potentially reaching levels that could physically affect the materials around them, including exciting hydrogen atoms and stressing piezoelectric crystals. The King's Chamber adds another layer to this acoustic puzzle. Researchers have found that it resonates at a different frequency, one that harmonizes with the Grand Gallery's 440 Hz. Some studies suggest the chamber resonates at frequencies corresponding to F-sharp, creating a harmonic relationship with the gallery's A note. If both chambers were active simultaneously, they would create a chord, a harmonic combination of frequencies that would reinforce each other and potentially create standing waves throughout the pyramid structure. The whole building would essentially be vibrating in tune, every chamber contributing to a unified acoustic system. There's also the matter of the granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, the box that supposedly held the pharaoh's body. When researchers struck this granite box, they discovered it resonates at a specific frequency that harmonizes with the chamber itself. It's essentially a tuning fork made of stone. Now, if you're building a coffin, acoustic properties are completely irrelevant. Dead people don't care if their box makes a nice sound when struck. But if you're building a resonant system designed to generate and amplify specific frequencies, having a perfectly tuned granite resonator in the heart of your acoustic chamber would be incredibly useful. Let's put this all together into a working theory of operation. Underground water creates low-frequency vibrations that propagate up through the bedrock. The subterranean chamber amplifies these vibrations, boosting the signal from the Earth's natural Schumann resonance. These amplified vibrations travel up through the pyramid structure, causing the piezoelectric granite blocks to generate electrical charge through mechanical stress. Meanwhile, chemical reactions in the Queen's Chamber produce hydrogen gas, which rises into the Grand Gallery. Acoustic resonators in the gallery excite this hydrogen while also adding to the mechanical stress on the surrounding granite. The King's Chamber, with its own acoustic properties, harmonizes with the gallery to create standing waves throughout the structure. All of these systems work together, acoustic, chemical, electrical, mechanical, to generate and concentrate energy. The pyramid wasn't one machine. It was an integrated system of multiple machines, all working in concert, all powered ultimately by the Earth itself. The flowing water, the planetary resonance, the chemical reactions, these were the inputs. The electricity, potentially the excited hydrogen, possibly even some form of electromagnetic transmission, these were the outputs. The ancient builders didn't just understand piezoelectricity, they understood acoustics, chemistry, hydrology, and electromagnetic resonance. They understood how to combine all of these into a single, massive, self-sustaining power plant. And they did all of this, we're told, as a side effect of building a very fancy coffin. Right. The Earth is constantly singing, a low, eternal hum that most of us never notice, and few of us could explain. The pyramid builders heard that song, understood its physics, and built a machine to transform it into power. Whether they succeeded, and what they did with that power, is what we'll explore next. But one thing is increasingly clear. These weren't primitive people worshipping sun gods and building monuments to their own mortality. These were engineers, and their greatest creation is still standing, waiting for us to finally understand what it was actually for. We've touched on the acoustic properties of the pyramid's internal chambers, but now it's time to really dive deep into what might be the most mind-bending aspect of this entire theory. Because the more you study the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber, the more you realize that whoever built this thing understood sound in ways that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. This wasn't just a building that happened to have interesting acoustics. This was a precision-tuned instrument, designed to manipulate sound waves with surgical accuracy. and possibly to use those sound waves as a fundamental part of its energy generation system. Let's start with a question that might seem unrelated. Why does an orchestra tune to A440? When musicians gather to perform, they don't just start playing and hope for the best. They tune their instruments to a common reference pitch, and that pitch is almost universally the A above middle C, vibrating at exactly 440 cycles per second. This standard was formally adopted in the 20th century, but the frequency itself has been recognized as harmonically significant for centuries. There's something about 440 Hz that resonates with human perception, that feels right in ways that are difficult to articulate but universally recognized. It's not arbitrary. It's not random. It's a frequency that seems to have special significance in the physics of sound and vibration. Now, the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid, this corbelled corridor nearly 50 meters long and 8 meters high, naturally resonates at approximately 440 Hz. Let me say that again because I want it to sink in. A structure built over 4,000 years ago, supposedly by people who had no concept of Hertz or acoustic engineering, just happens to resonate at the exact frequency that modern civilization has identified as the most harmonically important note in music. The ancient Egyptians allegedly didn't know about frequency measurement. They didn't have oscilloscopes or tuning forks calibrated to scientific standards. Yet they built a chamber that resonates at 440 Hz with remarkable precision. At this point, the word coincidence has lost all meaning. But what does it mean for a space to resonate at a particular frequency? This is where things get technical, but stay with me because it's genuinely fascinating. Every enclosed space has natural resonant frequencies, specific pitches at which sound waves bounce back and forth in perfect synchronization, reinforcing themselves and building in intensity. It's why some shower stalls make your singing voice sound amazing, while others make you sound like a dying cat. The dimensions of the space, the materials of the walls, the shape of the enclosure, all of these factors determine which frequencies will resonate and which will be dampened. The Grand Gallery's resonance at 440 Hz isn't an accident of random construction. It's a direct result of its specific dimensions, its corbelled walls that angle inward as they rise, its length-to-height ratio, and the acoustic properties of the limestone and granite that compose it. Changing any of these factors would change the resonant frequency. The builders achieved 440 Hz because they designed for 440 Hz. They knew exactly what they were doing. Now let's talk about those mysterious notches we mentioned earlier. The 27 pairs of regularly spaced slots carved into the walls of the Grand Gallery. Mainstream archaeology has suggested these were simply construction features, perhaps holding wooden beams that supported scaffolding during building. Once construction was complete, the beams were removed, leaving empty slots. It's a tidy explanation. It's also almost certainly wrong. Here's why. If these were just construction scaffolding supports, you'd expect them to be roughly placed, functional but not precise. Construction workers don't need millimeter accuracy for temporary supports. But the notches in the Grand Gallery are machined with extraordinary precision, spaced at exact intervals, positioned at specific heights along the walls. More tellingly, they're angled in ways that would be completely impractical for holding horizontal beams. The slots are cut at angles that would actually make scaffolding less stable, not more. Whatever these notches were designed to hold, it wasn't temporary construction equipment. The alternative theory is that these notches held resonators, devices specifically designed to vibrate at particular frequencies and amplify sound waves. If you've ever seen a marimba or xylophone, you've seen resonators in action. Those tubes beneath the wooden bars aren't just decorative. They amplify specific frequencies, making the instrument louder and richer in tone. The Grand Gallery may have been lined with similar devices, perhaps wooden or metal objects tuned to specific frequencies, mounted in those precisely carved notches, all vibrating in harmony to create an incredibly powerful acoustic environment. 27 pairs of resonators, strategically positioned along the gallery's length, would transform the space into something like a massive organ pipe. Sound entering from below, perhaps from the vibrations propagating up from the subterranean chamber, or from the chemical reactions in the Queen's chamber, or from deliberate acoustic input, would be captured, amplified, and focused by these resonators. The entire gallery would sing, filling with waves of precisely tuned sound that built upon themselves, growing in intensity with each reflection off the angled walls. The acoustic energy in such a system could be enormous, far beyond what you'd expect from the initial input. This is where we need to talk about a phenomenon called cymatics. because it's crucial to understanding how the pyramid's acoustic system might have actually worked. Cymatics is the study of visible sound, the patterns that form when sound waves interact with physical matter. If you've ever seen videos of sand on a metal plate forming geometric patterns when the plate is vibrated with specific frequencies, you've seen cymatics in action. Different frequencies create different patterns, some simple, some incredibly complex, and the patterns change instantly when the frequency changes. What cymatics demonstrates is that sound isn't just an invisible phenomenon that affects our ears. Sound is physical. Sound waves are pressure waves moving through matter, exerting force on everything they encounter. At high enough intensities, sound can shatter glass, liquefy tissue, or levitate small objects. At more moderate intensities, sound can organize matter into precise geometric arrangements, those cymatic patterns that seem almost magical when you first see them. Now imagine the Grand Gallery filled with hydrogen gas, as we discussed earlier, with high-intensity sound waves resonating at 440 Hz, bouncing off the walls and through the space. The sound wouldn't just pass through the hydrogen, it would organize it. The gas molecules would align themselves according to the pressure waves, forming standing wave patterns throughout the gallery. At the nodes of these standing waves, the points where waves cancel out and create stillness, hydrogen would concentrate. At the antinodes, the points of maximum vibration, the gas would be more diffuse. The gallery would essentially be sorting its contents with sound, organizing the hydrogen into specific patterns. Why would this matter? Because organized matter behaves differently than chaotic matter. Hydrogen atoms aligned in coherent patterns might interact with electromagnetic fields differently, might transfer energy more efficiently, might even undergo quantum effects that wouldn't occur in randomly distributed gas. We're getting into theoretical territory here, but the physics isn't fantasy. Sound can organize matter. Organized matter has different properties than disorganized matter. The pyramid's acoustic system might have been creating conditions that allowed for energy generation or transmission that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Let's move to the King's Chamber, because its acoustic properties add another layer to this already complex picture. The King's Chamber resonates at different frequencies than the Grand Gallery, frequencies that correspond roughly to F-sharp in musical terminology. Now, F-sharp and A have a specific harmonic relationship. They're not the same note, but they're not dissonant either. Play them together and you get a pleasing chord, a combination of frequencies that reinforce rather than fight each other. If the Grand Gallery and King's Chamber were both acoustically active simultaneously, both filled with resonating sound waves, their frequencies would interact. The 440 Hz from the gallery and the F-sharp frequencies from the chamber would combine, creating complex interference patterns and harmonic overtones. The entire pyramid would become a single, unified acoustic system, with different chambers contributing different frequencies to an overall sonic architecture. It's like an orchestra, where each section plays a different part, but together they create a symphony greater than any individual contribution. The granite sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, that box we've been told was meant to hold a pharaoh's body, adds yet another acoustic element. When struck, this granite box rings like a bell, producing a tone that harmonizes with the chamber's natural resonance. It's a resonator within a resonator, a tuning fork positioned at the heart of the acoustic system. If the chamber were filled with vibrating air or gas, the sarcophagus would vibrate in sympathy, adding its own contribution to the overall sound field. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that the entire pyramid was designed as a coupled oscillator system, multiple resonant chambers connected in ways that allow energy to transfer between them. In such a system, energy input at one point can build up and concentrate at other points, sometimes reaching intensities far greater than the original input. It's the principle behind everything from lasers to microwave ovens. Organize energy into coherent patterns, and you can achieve effects impossible with disorganized energy. Here's something that connects all of this back to the pyramid's potential function as a power plant. Piezoelectric crystals, like the quartz in the pyramid's granite, don't just generate electricity when squeezed. The effect works in reverse, too. Apply electricity to a piezoelectric crystal, and it vibrates. Apply alternating current at specific frequencies, and the crystal vibrates at those frequencies, producing sound waves. This bidirectional relationship between electricity and vibration means that the pyramid's acoustic system and its piezoelectric system wouldn't be separate. They'd be coupled, each affecting the other in a continuous feedback loop. Sound waves propagating through the granite would cause piezoelectric generation. That electrical generation would cause the crystals to vibrate, producing more sound. More sound would mean more piezoelectric generation, which would mean more vibration, which would mean more sound. Under the right conditions, such a system could be self-amplifying, a feedback loop that builds in intensity until some limiting factor kicks in. The pyramid might have been designed to initiate such a feedback loop, using the Earth's natural vibrations and chemical reactions as the initial input, then amplifying through acoustic and piezoelectric coupling until significant power levels were achieved. There's also the matter of ultrasound, sound frequencies above the range of human hearing. While the Grand Gallery resonates at 440 Hz, well within audible range, the piezoelectric vibrations of quartz crystals often occur at much higher frequencies. Modern quartz oscillators in electronic devices operate at thousands or millions of hertz. If the pyramid's granite was generating ultrasonic vibrations alongside audible ones, we'd have multiple acoustic systems operating simultaneously. A low-frequency system based on the chamber geometries, and a high-frequency system based on crystal physics. The interactions between these systems could produce effects we haven't even begun to theorize about. Ancient cultures worldwide associated specific sounds and frequencies with spiritual power, healing, and cosmic harmony. The Egyptians were no exception. Their religious texts speak of creation through divine utterance, of the power of spoken words to alter reality, of sacred sounds that connected the earthly and heavenly realms. We tend to dismiss this as primitive mysticism. But what if it was primitive physics? What if the ancients understood, through observation and experimentation rather than mathematical formalism, that sound could do things that seemed magical? Shatter objects, heal wounds, organize matter, generate energy. All of these are real effects of sound at various frequencies and intensities. The magic was just physics they didn't have the vocabulary to describe. The pyramid, in this view, wasn't just an energy generator. It was a temple of sound, a place where acoustic phenomena were studied, harnessed, and possibly worshipped. The religious and the technological weren't separate categories for ancient peoples the way they are for us. A machine that generated power through sound waves wouldn't have been merely useful. It would have been sacred, a physical manifestation of the creative forces that made the universe. The priests who operated it wouldn't have been technicians in our sense of the word. They would have been intermediaries between humanity and the fundamental forces of nature, using their knowledge to channel cosmic energies for earthly purposes. This helps explain why the tomb was never found to contain a body, why the burial chamber shows no signs of ever having been used for burial, why the entire structure seems designed for something other than storing a corpse. The pyramid was a functioning machine, and like all machines, it required operators. Not mourners, not priests performing death rituals. Operators who understood how to initiate the chemical reactions, how to tune the acoustic resonators, how to manage the feedback loops between sound and electricity. When the machine stopped working, whether through accident, attack, or the loss of necessary knowledge, it became just a building. A very impressive, very mysterious building that subsequent civilizations could only explain as a monument to death, because they had no framework for understanding it as a monument to energy. We've now assembled most of the pieces of the pyramid power plant theory. Piezoelectric generation from quartz-rich granite under pressure, resonance with the Earth's Schumann frequency through underground aquifers, chemical production of hydrogen, gas in the Queen's chamber, acoustic amplification and organization in the Grand Gallery, harmonic coupling between multiple resonant chambers, and a self-reinforcing feedback loop that could build tremendous energy from relatively modest inputs. Each piece by itself is scientifically plausible. Together, they form a coherent theory of operation for a machine unlike anything in our modern experience, but not unlike what a genius like Nikola Tesla was trying to build 4,000 years later. And that brings us to the next part of our story. Because Tesla wasn't just a random inventor who happened to have similar ideas. He was working toward the exact same goal, using remarkably similar principles, with technology that looks eerily like a modern version of the ancient pyramid. The question isn't whether there's a connection. The question is whether Tesla knew, whether he somehow discovered what the pyramid was really for, and tried to recreate it with 20th century materials. The answer to that question changes everything we think we know about both ancient history and modern science. Everything we've discussed so far, the piezoelectric materials, the acoustic resonance, the chemical reactions, the underground aquifers, has been theoretical, educated speculation based on observable features and known physics. Critics would say it's all just coincidence and imagination, that we're seeing patterns where none exist, that the pyramid is exactly what mainstream archaeology claims: a very impressive, very old, very dead building with no function beyond housing. A very dead pharaoh. And until recently, that's where the argument would end. Speculation versus official narrative, with no way to definitively prove either side. Then came 2018, and everything changed. In July of that year, a team of researchers from ITMO University in Russia and the Laserzentrum Hanover in Germany published a study in the Journal of Applied Physics. Not some fringe publication, not a conspiracy theory blog, but a peer-reviewed, legitimate scientific journal. The study's title was dry and academic, as scientific papers tend to be. Electromagnetic Properties of the Great Pyramid, First Multipole Resonances and Energy Concentration. But the findings were anything but dry. For the first time in history, mainstream science had produced empirical evidence that the Great Pyramid does something. Not symbolically, not spiritually, physically, electromagnetically. The crazy theory had just received its first scientific stamp of approval. Here's what the researchers did. They created a detailed mathematical model of the Great Pyramid, accounting for its dimensions, geometry, and the known properties of its construction materials. Then they subjected this model to simulated electromagnetic radiation, specifically radio waves with wavelengths ranging from 200 to 600 meters. They wanted to see how the pyramid would interact with these waves, whether it would absorb them, reflect them, or do something else entirely. What they found was remarkable. The pyramid, according to their calculations, acts as a resonant cavity for electromagnetic waves within this frequency range. That means it doesn't just passively sit there while radio waves wash over it. It interacts with those waves, capturing them, channeling them, and concentrating them in specific locations. The structure essentially functions as an electromagnetic lens, focusing energy the way a magnifying glass focuses light. And where does this concentrated energy end up? In the internal chambers, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the spaces we've been discussing throughout this video. And, intriguingly, in the bedrock directly beneath the pyramid's base. Let me repeat that because it's important. A peer-reviewed scientific study found that the Great Pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy inside itself and beneath itself. The crazy idea that the pyramid was some kind of energy device just went from fringe theory to published physics. The researchers weren't pyramid enthusiasts or alternative historians. They were physicists studying electromagnetic resonance, and they happened to choose the pyramid as an interesting geometric structure to model. They weren't trying to prove the power plant theory. They just stumbled into evidence that supports it. Now, some context is necessary here. The study was theoretical, a mathematical model rather than direct measurement inside the actual pyramid. The researchers were clear about this limitation, and they called for experimental verification of their findings. They also noted that modern conditions differ from ancient ones. The pyramid has lost most of its outer casing. The internal chambers have been altered by centuries of exploration, and the surrounding environment has changed dramatically. A pristine pyramid in its original condition might behave differently from the weathered monument we see today. But here's the thing. The model was based on the known properties of limestone and granite, the actual materials the pyramid is built from. The geometry was based on the actual measured dimensions of the structure. The physics was standard electromagnetic theory, nothing exotic or speculative. The researchers didn't assume anything unusual about the pyramid. They just asked what would happen if you hit a limestone and granite structure of these specific dimensions with radio waves of these specific frequencies. And the answer was, it would concentrate that energy in ways that shouldn't happen with a random pile of rocks. The wavelength range they studied, 200 to 600 meters, corresponds to radio frequencies between roughly 500 kilohertz and 1.5 megahertz. These are relatively long wavelengths in the AM radio band, far below the frequencies of visible light or even most commercial radio transmissions. At first glance, this might seem irrelevant to ancient Egypt. The Egyptians didn't have radio transmitters after all. But remember what we discussed about the Schumann resonance and the Earth's natural electromagnetic field. The planet is constantly bathed in electromagnetic radiation across a wide spectrum, including these lower frequencies. Natural sources like lightning, solar activity, and the interaction between the solar wind and Earth's magnetosphere all produce radio frequency energy. The pyramid wouldn't need artificial transmitters to have energy to concentrate. Nature provides plenty. The study found that the concentration effect was strongest at wavelengths around 200 meters, the shorter end of the range they tested. This makes sense from a physics perspective. Resonance effects depend on the relationship between wavelength and the dimensions of the resonant structure. The pyramid's dimensions apparently create optimal resonance conditions for wavelengths in this range. Whether this was intentional or coincidental is, of course, the billion-dollar question. But given everything else we know about the pyramid's precision, the mathematical constants encoded in its proportions, the astronomical alignments, the careful material selection, coincidence is becoming an increasingly hard sell. What particularly excited alternative researchers was the finding that energy concentrates beneath the pyramid, not just inside it. Remember those underground aquifers we discussed? The flowing water creating vibrations that propagate up through the structure? If the pyramid is concentrating electromagnetic energy into that same subterranean zone, we have two energy systems, acoustic and electromagnetic, both focused on the same location. The potential for interaction between these systems is enormous. Electromagnetic fields can affect the movement of charged particles in water. Vibrating water can generate electromagnetic effects of its own. A system designed to combine these phenomena could produce energy outputs far greater than either system alone. The researchers also noted that the pyramid's geometric features, the internal chambers, the passages, the granite structures, all contribute to the electromagnetic focusing effect. Remove the chambers and the effect diminishes. Change their positions and the focusing changes. This is consistent with what we'd expect from a deliberately designed device. Every component serves a function. Every feature contributes to the overall operation. It's not consistent with what we'd expect from a tomb, where internal layout would be determined by burial requirements rather than electromagnetic optimization. Here's where skeptics typically push back. They argue that finding electromagnetic resonance in the pyramid doesn't prove it was designed for that purpose. Lots of structures exhibit resonance effects at various frequencies. It's just physics. A cathedral, a parking garage, a natural cave. They all have electromagnetic properties determined by their geometry and materials. The pyramid's resonance might be no more intentional than the echo in your bathroom. Fair point. But consider the counterargument. The pyramid's resonance isn't random. It occurs at specific, predictable frequencies based on its precise dimensions. Those dimensions, as we've discussed, encode mathematical constants and planetary measurements with accuracy that defies coincidence. The materials were selected and positioned in ways consistent with electromagnetic optimization. Conductive granite inside, insulating limestone outside. The structure sits atop underground water sources that could provide both vibrational input and electromagnetic interaction. And now we have scientific confirmation that the pyramid does, in fact, concentrate electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers and foundation. At some point, the accumulation of coincidences becomes its own form of evidence. One coincidence is believable. Two coincidences are suspicious. A dozen coincidences, all pointing in the same direction, all consistent with a single explanatory theory? That's a pattern. And patterns in science demand explanation. The 2018 study also opened up some fascinating speculative possibilities. If the pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy, what was that energy used for? The study didn't address this question. It was outside the scope of their physics investigation. But others have proposed answers. Some suggest the concentrated energy could have powered devices or processes we don't understand. Others propose it was used for communication, creating a beacon of electromagnetic radiation, visible, or rather, detectable, across vast distances. Still others suggest medical or agricultural applications. Concentrated electromagnetic fields can affect biological processes, and ancient texts speak of healing temples and sacred sites with unusual properties. One intriguing possibility connects to our earlier discussion of the pyramid's acoustic system. Electromagnetic waves and sound waves are different phenomena, but they can interact under certain conditions. Strong electromagnetic fields can affect the behavior of ions and charged particles in gases, including hydrogen, which we theorized was produced in the Queen's chamber. If the pyramid was concentrating electromagnetic energy while simultaneously filling with hydrogen gas, excited by acoustic resonance, the interactions between these systems could produce effects we haven't even begun to theorize about. Plasma formation, perhaps. Enhanced chemical reactions. Energy conversion processes that our physics doesn't yet describe. The timing of this study is worth noting. 2018 wasn't some special anniversary or coordinated reveal. It was just when these particular researchers happened to publish their work. But the fact that serious scientists are now taking the pyramid's physical properties seriously, applying rigorous methods to studying its behavior, represents a shift in the conversation. For decades, anyone who suggested the pyramid might be more than a tomb was dismissed as a crank, a conspiracy theorist, someone outside the bounds of respectable discourse. The 2018 study doesn't prove the pyramid was a power plant, but it demonstrates that the question is worth asking, that the physics actually supports unusual behavior, that mainstream science can engage with these ideas without compromising its integrity. Since the study's publication, other researchers have begun examining the pyramid through similar lenses. There's growing interest in what's sometimes called archaeoacoustics, the study of sound in ancient structures, and in the electromagnetic properties of ancient sites more broadly. The Giza Plateau has been subjected to thermal scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and various other non-invasive technologies, all revealing anomalies that challenge conventional explanations. The pyramid keeps its secrets, but it's gradually revealing them to those who ask the right questions with the right tools. Of course, the ultimate test would be direct measurement inside the pyramid during controlled experiments, something that's been proposed but never approved. The Egyptian government, which controls access to the site, has historically been resistant to experiments that might challenge the tomb narrative or attract unwanted attention from alternative researchers. There's also legitimate concern about damaging a 4,000-year-old monument with modern equipment. But non-invasive techniques are improving rapidly, and it's possible that future studies will provide even more detailed understanding of what's actually happening inside that ancient stone machine. For our purposes, the 2018 study matters because it bridges the gap between speculation and science. Everything we've discussed, the piezoelectric materials, the acoustic chambers, the chemical reactions, the underground energy sources, has been theoretical. Plausible, consistent with evidence, but theoretical. The electromagnetic study adds empirical confirmation that the pyramid does something physically unusual, something related to energy concentration, something consistent with a functional device rather than an elaborate coffin. It's not proof. It's not a smoking gun. But it's the first time mainstream physics has looked at the pyramid and said, huh, that's weird. That's actually weird. And weird, in science, is where discoveries begin. The ancient builders, whoever they were, created something that continues to surprise us 4 millennia later. They selected materials with specific electrical properties, arranged them in geometries that produce specific resonance effects, positioned the whole structure over natural energy sources, and achieved precision that challenges modern capabilities. Then, somehow, this knowledge was lost, buried under centuries of tomb mythology, dismissed as primitive superstition, ignored by a scientific establishment convinced it already knew the answers. But the pyramid doesn't care about our narratives. It's still there, still doing whatever it was designed to do, still concentrating electromagnetic energy in its chambers and foundation, still resonating at specific frequencies, still keeping its secrets. The 2018 study was just the beginning, a crack in the door of a room we've been told doesn't exist. What else we might find when we open that door wider is anyone's guess. For now, though, we've established something crucial. The pyramid isn't just impressive. It isn't just mysterious. It isn't just a feat of ancient engineering. It's a functioning electromagnetic device, confirmed by peer-reviewed physics, operating according to principles we're only beginning to understand. And that changes everything about how we should approach both its ancient past and its relevance to our energy-hungry present. Speaking of which, it's time to talk about someone who might have understood all of this over a century ago. A Serbian genius who tried to give the world free energy and was destroyed for it. His name was Nikola Tesla, and his most ambitious project looks suspiciously like a modern version of the very thing we've been discussing. Now we come to the part of the story where ancient history collides with modern genius, where a 4,000-year-old mystery meets a Serbian inventor who might have figured it all out, and paid the ultimate price for his discovery. Nikola Tesla is one of the most celebrated and misunderstood figures in the history of science. He gave us alternating current, the induction motor, radio technology, and dozens of other inventions that literally power modern civilization. He also claimed he could split the earth in half, talk to pigeons, and died alone in a New York hotel room with nothing but unpaid bills and a lifetime of unrealized dreams. The man was either the greatest genius who ever lived or completely insane. Possibly both. Definitely fascinating. But here's the thing about Tesla that most people don't fully appreciate. His ultimate goal wasn't just to invent cool gadgets. His life's work was directed toward a single revolutionary objective: free, wireless energy for the entire planet. Not energy that you'd pay for monthly. Not energy controlled by utility companies. Free energy, transmitted through the air and ground, available to anyone with a receiver, impossible to meter or monopolize. And the technology he developed to achieve this goal looks suspiciously, almost impossibly, like a modern version of the Great Pyramid. The story begins in 1899, when Tesla set up a laboratory in Colorado Springs to conduct high-voltage experiments that his neighbors in New York were understandably nervous about. Good luck explaining to your insurance company that your building burned down because the guy next door was shooting artificial lightning bolts. In Colorado, Tesla had space, isolation, and access to the high-altitude conditions he believed would help his experiments. What he discovered there would shape the rest of his life, and potentially connect him to secrets thousands of years old. Tesla became convinced that the Earth itself could be used as a conductor of electrical energy. Not the wires and cables that carried electricity from power plants to homes, but the actual planet, its crust, its atmosphere, its electromagnetic field. He believed that if you pumped energy into the Earth at the right frequency, it would resonate throughout the entire globe, carrying that energy to any point on the surface. You wouldn't need wires. You wouldn't need power lines stretching across continents. You'd just need transmitters to pump energy in and receivers to pull it out. The Earth would do the rest. This wasn't fantasy. Tesla demonstrated the principle with his Colorado Springs apparatus, generating artificial lightning, lighting bulbs without wires from miles away, and reportedly causing a blackout in the entire town when his experiments drew too much power from the local generator. The man wasn't theorizing. He was proving. And what he proved was that wireless energy transmission through the Earth was physically possible. Exactly what the pyramid power plant theory proposes the ancients achieved thousands of years earlier. In 1900, flush with confidence from his Colorado experiments, Tesla convinced financier J.P. Morgan to fund his most ambitious project yet, a transmission tower on Long Island that would demonstrate wireless energy and communication on a global scale. The location was Shoreham, New York, and the facility would be called Wardenclyffe. Tesla envisioned it as the first node in a worldwide network, a prototype that would prove his concept and attract investment for towers spanning the globe. Every person on Earth would have access to unlimited free energy, transmitted through the atmosphere and ground, powering a new age of prosperity and technological advancement. It was, without exaggeration, the most utopian technological vision in human history. The Wardenclyffe Tower itself was a remarkable structure. Rising nearly 60 meters above the Long Island landscape, it was topped by a distinctive mushroom-shaped copper dome, about 20 meters in diameter. This dome wasn't decorative, it was functional, designed to interact with the upper atmosphere and facilitate energy transmission. The tower's wooden frame supported this massive metal structure while insulating it from the ground, allowing Tesla to control how and when energy was released into the air. But here's where things get really interesting for our pyramid discussion. The tower wasn't just what you could see above ground. Beneath the surface, Tesla had constructed an elaborate underground system that most people never talk about. The foundation extended deep into the earth, with iron and copper rods driven far below the surface, reportedly reaching down to the water table, the underground aquifer beneath Long Island. These metal conductors weren't structural supports. They were electrical connections to the earth itself, designed to tap into groundwater and use it as part of the transmission system. Sound familiar? An energy transmission structure positioned directly over an underground water source, with conductive materials extending down into that water. The pyramid sits over aquifers with conductive granite reaching toward those same underground flows. Tesla's tower had metal rods penetrating to the water table. The pyramid had shafts and chambers positioned to interact with subterranean water movement. The parallel is striking, almost too striking to be coincidental. Tesla planned to use the Earth's natural resonant frequency to amplify and transmit his energy. He understood that the planet has electromagnetic properties, that it vibrates at specific frequencies, that energy pumped in at the right rhythm would propagate globally rather than dissipating locally. This is exactly what modern science calls Schumann resonance, the same phenomenon we discussed in relation to the pyramid's apparent tuning. Tesla didn't use that term. Schumann's formal discovery came decades later. But Tesla understood the principle intuitively, through experimentation rather than mathematical derivation. The tower's design reflected this understanding. The underground portion would pump energy into the Earth, using the water table as a conductive medium to spread that energy through the planet's crust. The above-ground dome would interact with the ionosphere, the electrically charged upper atmosphere, creating a circuit that used the entire Earth as the transmission medium. Energy would flow from transmitter to Earth to ionosphere and back, carrying power to any point on the globe where a receiver was positioned to capture it. Now let's talk about the pyramid's missing capstone, because this might be the key that connects Tesla's tower to the ancient structure. The Great Pyramid, as it stands today, is flat-topped. The apex is missing, leaving a roughly 10-meter square platform where a point should be. Mainstream archaeology explains this as damage, erosion, or theft. The capstone was removed at some point in history, possibly for its materials, possibly by natural weathering, possibly by who knows what. But ancient accounts consistently describe the pyramid as having been topped by a special capstone, often referred to as a pyramidion. These capstones were typically made of different material than the rest of the structure, frequently gold, electrum, a gold-silver alloy, or granite covered in gold leaf. The Egyptians placed enormous religious significance on these capstones, calling them Ben-Ben, and associating them with the sun god Ra and the primordial mound of creation. They were literally the crowning glory of the pyramid, the point where heaven met earth. Gold, of course, is one of the best electrical conductors known to humanity. A golden capstone on top of a structure that concentrates electromagnetic energy in its interior would function as a transmission point, a place where concentrated energy could be released into the atmosphere. The pyramid would gather energy from below through its interaction with underground water and piezoelectric resonance, concentrate that energy in its chambers, and release it through the conductive capstone into the air above. This is almost exactly what Tesla's dome was designed to do. Gather energy, concentrate it, and release it through a conductive structure positioned at the highest point. The shapes are different, hemisphere versus pyramid point, but the function is identical. And both structures relied on underground water as a crucial component of the system. The parallel between Wardenclyffe's copper dome over aquifer-connected rods and the pyramid's hypothetical golden capstone over water-interacting chambers is remarkable. Did Tesla know about the pyramid theory? Did he somehow discover what the ancient structure was really for and attempt to recreate it with modern materials? There's no definitive proof, but there are intriguing hints. Tesla was famously interested in ancient civilizations and alternative history. He made cryptic comments about receiving knowledge from sources he couldn't explain, about understanding principles that seemed to come from outside his own reasoning. He was known to spend time in libraries researching obscure topics, and his personal papers, many of which were seized by the FBI after his death, contained references to subjects far outside mainstream electrical engineering. Some researchers have pointed to specific statements Tesla made about the pyramid. He reportedly called it an energy machine in private correspondence, though the originals of these letters have never been verified. He allegedly studied Egyptian architecture and mythology, looking for clues about ancient technology. Whether these accounts are accurate history or wishful thinking by Tesla enthusiasts is difficult to determine. Tesla's life has accumulated so many legends that separating fact from fiction requires detective work that often hits dead ends. What we can say with confidence is that the principles Tesla employed at Wardenclyffe match the principles the pyramid appears to embody. Both structures position themselves over underground water sources. Both use conductive materials to interact with those water sources. Both are designed to resonate with the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency. Both concentrate energy internally before releasing it externally. Both are intended to transmit energy wirelessly over vast distances. Both use the planet itself as a transmission medium. Either Tesla independently discovered the same technology that ancient builders employed 4,000 years earlier, or he somehow learned about that ancient technology and attempted to recreate it. Neither explanation is comfortable for mainstream history. Independent discovery would mean we've been wrong about ancient capabilities. Knowledge transmission would mean there are channels of information preservation we don't understand. Both possibilities open doors that official narratives prefer to keep firmly closed. Tesla's experiments at Wardenclyffe, limited as they were before funding collapsed, showed that his approach worked. He demonstrated energy transmission, lit lamps without wires, and proved that the Earth could serve as a conductor for electrical energy. The technology wasn't theoretical, it was functional. Given full funding and time to complete his vision, Tesla might have achieved exactly what he promised. Wireless energy for the world, free and unlimited, available to everyone. The pyramid, if our theory is correct, already achieved this thousands of years ago. It was the ancient Wardenclyffe, built with stone instead of steel, using piezoelectric granite instead of copper coils, employing acoustic resonance instead of electrical oscillators. The materials were different, the scale was different, but the underlying physics, the exploitation of Earth's resonance, the interaction with underground water, the concentration and transmission of electromagnetic energy, was the same. And both projects met the same fate: destruction before completion of their global mission. The pyramid lost its capstone at some unknown point, crippling its transmission capability. Tesla's tower was demolished before it could ever operate at full capacity. Two attempts to give humanity free energy, separated by 4,000 years, both stopped short of success. The pattern is disturbing. The coincidence is uncomfortable. And the question it raises is inevitable. Was this bad luck, or was it something else? Some researchers see intentional suppression in both cases. The pyramid's capstone wasn't just lost. It was removed, possibly deliberately, by forces who didn't want the technology to function. Tesla's tower wasn't just abandoned. It was destroyed, torn down and sold for scrap by people who had specific reasons to prevent his success. Whether you find this explanation compelling or paranoid depends largely on how much intentionality you're willing to attribute to historical events. But the parallel remains. Two energy liberation projects, two failures to reach completion, two technologies that could have changed human civilization, both silenced before they could speak. Tesla spent the last decades of his life in declining circumstances, his reputation fading, his funding dried up, his greatest project reduced to rubble. He continued to work on ideas, continued to file patents, continued to believe in the possibility of free energy. But Wardenclyffe had been his moment, his chance to prove that the universe offered abundant energy to anyone who understood how to harvest it. That chance was taken from him, and he never got another one. The pyramid, meanwhile, has stood for 4 millennia, patiently waiting for humanity to remember what it was actually for. Stripped of its casing, missing its capstone, surrounded by tour buses and souvenir shops, it endures as a monument to technology we've forgotten and brilliance we've dismissed. Tesla would have understood. He knew what it was like to have transformative knowledge and watch the world refuse to accept it. He knew what it was like to build something revolutionary and see it torn down by people who couldn't see beyond their own interests. Two geniuses, separated by 4,000 years, working on the same problem, using the same principles, facing the same opposition. The pyramid builders succeeded in constructing their machine. Tesla nearly succeeded in constructing his. Both were stopped before their technology could transform the world, and both left behind tantalizing hints of what might have been. Clues scattered across millennia, waiting for someone to connect the dots and understand what free energy really means and why it remains forbidden. The question isn't whether Tesla and the pyramid builders were working on the same thing. The evidence strongly suggests they were. The question is why this technology keeps being suppressed, why every attempt to give humanity unlimited free energy seems to end in destruction and silence. And that's a question with answers that powerful people prefer you never hear. So here's the million-dollar question, or rather, the billion-dollar question, because that's roughly what was at stake. If Tesla's technology worked, if wireless free energy was actually possible, why didn't it happen? Why isn't every home on Earth powered by atmospheric electricity right now? Why are we still burning fossil fuels, still fighting wars over oil, still paying monthly utility bills to corporations that charge us for something the planet generates naturally? The answer, unfortunately, is exactly what you probably suspect: money. Specifically, the money of one man who had more of it than anyone else on Earth, and who stood to lose everything if Tesla succeeded. John Pierpont Morgan. J.P. Morgan to history, and just Morgan to everyone who worked for him or owed him money, which was basically everyone, was the most powerful financier in American history. When we talk about robber barons and Gilded Age tycoons, Morgan is the template. This was a man who personally bailed out the United States government during the financial panic of 1893. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. The U.S. Treasury was running out of gold, and Morgan organized a private loan to keep the country solvent. When your government owes you money, you've achieved a level of power that most people can't even conceptualize. Morgan's empire touched virtually every major industry in America. Banking, obviously. J.P. Morgan and Company was the most influential financial institution in the country. But also railroads, steel, shipping, and most relevant to our story, electricity. Morgan was one of the primary investors in Thomas Edison's electrical empire, He funded the Edison Electric Illuminating Company. His own mansion was one of the first private residences in America to be wired for electric lighting. When Edison and his direct current system battled against Westinghouse and Tesla's alternating current, Morgan's money was firmly on Edison's side. But here's where it gets interesting. By 1900, the AC versus DC war was essentially over, and AC had won. Tesla's alternating current system proved vastly superior for transmitting electricity over long distances, and Westinghouse, using Tesla's patents, had become the dominant force in electrical power. Morgan, being a pragmatic businessman rather than a sentimental one, had already begun investing in AC technology. He understood that the future of electricity would involve massive power plants generating AC current and vast networks of copper wires carrying that current to homes and businesses across the country. And Morgan was positioned to profit from every step of that process. Let's break down exactly what Morgan controlled, because this is crucial to understanding why Tesla had to be stopped. Morgan had significant interests in copper mining. Electrical wires are made of copper. Every mile of power line strung across America put money in Morgan's pocket. Morgan had investments in coal mining. Power plants burned coal to generate electricity. Every kilowatt hour generated meant coal being consumed, and Morgan profiting. Morgan controlled or influenced the financing of electrical utilities. Every company that sold electricity to consumers was either owned by Morgan interests or dependent on Morgan for capital. The entire electrical infrastructure of the United States, the wires, the fuel, the companies, all of it flowed through Morgan's financial empire. Now imagine what wireless free energy would do to this business model. No wires means no copper sales. No power plants means no coal consumption. No utility companies means no monthly bills, no revenue streams, no dividends for investors. Tesla wasn't just proposing a new technology. He was proposing the complete destruction of the most profitable industry in America, an industry that Morgan had spent decades building and controlled with an iron grip. Free energy wasn't just economically disruptive. For Morgan, it was an existential threat. This is the context in which Morgan agreed to fund Tesla's Wardenclyffe project in 1900. The initial investment was $150,000, a substantial sum, roughly $4 million in today's money, but pocket change for Morgan. Tesla presented the project primarily as a wireless communication system, a way to transmit messages across the Atlantic without cables. This was appealing to Morgan. Communication technology was a growing field with obvious commercial potential. What Tesla didn't fully disclose, at least not initially, was that the communication system was just the beginning. The real goal was wireless energy transmission on a global scale. There's some debate among historians about exactly when Morgan realized what Tesla was actually building. Some argue he was fooled from the start, that Tesla deliberately misrepresented the project to secure funding. Others suggest Morgan knew perfectly well and simply didn't believe Tesla could actually pull it off, that he saw the investment as a hedge, a way to control a potentially disruptive technology by owning it. Still others propose that Morgan's intelligence network, and he had an extensive one, informed him of Tesla's true intentions only after construction was well underway. What's not disputed is what happened next. As Wardenclyffe took shape and Tesla's ambitions became clearer, Morgan's enthusiasm evaporated. When Tesla requested additional funding to complete the project, Morgan refused. Flatly. Completely. Not, let me think about it. Not, show me more progress first. Just, no. The official reason was that Tesla had exceeded his budget and failed to deliver on his initial promises. The real reason, as Tesla himself understood, was that Morgan had figured out what free energy would mean for his empire. There's a famous exchange, possibly apocryphal but widely repeated, in which Morgan asked Tesla how he would meter the electricity his system transmitted. How would users be charged? How would profits be calculated? Tesla allegedly replied that metering wouldn't be necessary. The energy would be free for everyone. Morgan's response: if anyone can draw on the power, where do we put the meter? We can't make money on free energy. That, according to legend, was the end of the conversation and the end of Morgan's support. Whether or not this specific dialogue occurred, the underlying logic is unassailable. You cannot monetize something that's freely available. You cannot build a business model around abundance. Scarcity is the foundation of profit. If something is scarce, you can charge for it. If it's unlimited, you can't. Tesla was proposing to make energy unlimited. That was wonderful for humanity and catastrophic for anyone who made money from energy scarcity. Morgan chose his portfolio over the future of civilization. Unsurprisingly. But Morgan didn't just withdraw his own funding. He went further, much further. Morgan's influence in the financial world was essentially absolute. No major investment happened in America without his approval, or at least his tolerance. When Morgan decided Tesla was persona non grata, that decision rippled through every bank, every investment house, every potential source of capital in the country. Tesla found himself blacklisted, not officially, not publicly, but effectively. Every door he knocked on was closed. Every investor he approached was suddenly unavailable. Every funding source dried up as if by magic. This wasn't paranoia on Tesla's part. It was documented reality. Tesla wrote letters describing his inability to secure financing despite the proven potential of his technology. He noted that investors who had initially expressed enthusiasm would suddenly reverse course after conversations with Morgan's associates. The financial establishment had received its marching orders. Tesla was not to be funded. His project was not to be completed. Free energy was not to happen. By 1905, Wardenclyffe was essentially dead. Tesla continued working there sporadically, using his own dwindling resources, but the grand vision of a global wireless energy network was finished. The tower stood incomplete, a monument to what might have been, while Tesla sank deeper into debt. He lost the property in 1915 when he couldn't pay his bills. The tower was demolished in 1917 and sold for scrap, about $1,700 worth of materials, which is what the future of human energy independence was apparently worth to the salvage companies. The timing of the demolition is worth noting. 1917 was the year America entered World War I. The official explanation for tearing down the tower was that German spies might use it for communication or surveillance. This seems unlikely given that the tower had never actually operated as intended and was in serious disrepair. But it provided convenient cover for eliminating a structure that certain powerful interests wanted gone. Wartime security concerns trumped any questions about why a privately owned research facility needed to be destroyed. Tesla spent the remaining decades of his life in genteel poverty, living in increasingly modest hotel rooms, working on projects he could never fund, giving interviews in which he made claims that ranged from genuinely prescient to seemingly delusional. He predicted smartphones, drones, and the internet decades before they existed. He also claimed to have invented a death ray and to have received communications from Mars. The mixture of brilliant foresight and apparent eccentricity made it easy for the establishment to dismiss him as a has-been, a once great inventor who had lost his grip on reality. Very convenient for anyone who wanted his more dangerous ideas forgotten. When Tesla died in January 1943, alone in his room at the New Yorker Hotel, the United States government moved with remarkable speed. Within hours of his death being reported, agents from the FBI and the Office of Alien Property, Tesla was technically still a foreign national, despite having lived in America for 60 years, arrived to seize his belongings. They carted away approximately 80 boxes of documents, notebooks, equipment, and personal effects. 80 boxes. From a man who had supposedly spent his final years in poverty, working on nothing of importance. That's a lot of nothing to confiscate. The official story is that the government was concerned about national security, that Tesla might have developed weapons technology that shouldn't fall into enemy hands during wartime. This explanation has some merit. Tesla had indeed claimed to be working on directed energy weapons and other military applications. But it doesn't explain why the seizure was so comprehensive, or why it happened so fast, or why portions of Tesla's papers have never been released to the public. Here's the part that conspiracy theorists love and mainstream historians dismiss. Of those 80 boxes, approximately 20 have never been accounted for. They weren't returned to Tesla's estate. They weren't deposited in any public archive. They simply vanished into the classified depths of government storage, presumably in the same warehouse where they keep the Ark of the Covenant and the alien bodies from Roswell. Nobody knows what was in those boxes. Nobody knows where they are now. The government's position is essentially, what boxes? What might those missing documents contain? Tesla's complete plans for wireless energy transmission, perhaps. Technical specifications that could allow someone to recreate his work. Notes about the pyramid and ancient technology, if the theories about his knowledge are correct. Evidence of who exactly ordered his project destroyed and why. We don't know. We may never know. The information is either lost forever or locked away by people who decided the world wasn't ready for it, and who apparently still believe that 8 decades later. The pattern here is impossible to ignore. Tesla developed technology that threatened existing power structures. That technology was suppressed through financial strangulation and physical destruction. When Tesla died, his papers were seized and partially disappeared. The same sequence: revolutionary energy technology, suppression by powerful interests, mysterious disappearance of evidence, appears in case after case throughout the 20th century. Inventors who claim to have developed free energy devices have faced ridicule, bankruptcy, suspicious deaths, and the confiscation of their work with disturbing regularity. Whether you believe these cases represent genuine suppression of real technology or just a pattern of frauds and failures depends largely on how much faith you have in the benevolence of corporations and governments. What's undeniable is that Morgan got his wish. The electrical infrastructure he profited from became the foundation of modern civilization. Copper wires still stretch across every continent. Power plants still burn fuel to generate electricity. Utility companies still sent monthly bills to every home and business. The system Morgan protected and Tesla threatened remains essentially unchanged a century later, still funneling money to the descendants, corporate if not biological, of the interests that killed Wardenclyffe. And Tesla? Tesla became a legend, ironically more famous in death than he was in his diminished final years. His name adorns electric cars and research institutes. His inventions power the modern world, even as his greatest vision remains unrealized. He's celebrated as a misunderstood genius, which he was, and pitied as a tragic figure who couldn't navigate the business world, which misses the point entirely. Tesla didn't fail because he was a poor businessman. He failed because he threatened the most powerful business interests on Earth, and they crushed him for it. The question that haunts this story is simple. What would the world look like if Morgan had said yes? If Wardenclyffe had been completed? If wireless free energy had become a reality in 1905? No oil wars, no climate crisis from fossil fuel emissions, no energy poverty, no monthly bills draining the budgets of struggling families. A world transformed by abundance instead of controlled by scarcity. We'll never know what that world might have been, because one man decided his copper mines and coal interests mattered more than the future of humanity. And somewhere in a government warehouse, or perhaps destroyed long ago, sit the documents that might have told us exactly how to build it. Tesla's final secrets, taken by force, hidden from the public, protected from the dangerous possibility that someone might actually succeed where he failed. The empire struck back, and the empire won, at least for now. So we've established that the Great Pyramid was likely a sophisticated energy generation and transmission device, built by people who understood physics we're only beginning to rediscover. We've connected it to Tesla's work and shown how powerful interests destroyed his attempt to recreate this ancient technology. But there's one more piece of this puzzle that we haven't addressed. What happened to the original? If the pyramid was a functioning power plant, why did it stop working? And what happened to the civilization that built it? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. There's evidence that the pyramid didn't just fall into disuse. There's evidence it failed catastrophically, violently, possibly taking its creators down with it. Let's go back inside the pyramid and look at some details that mainstream archaeology has struggled to explain. The Grand Gallery, that acoustically perfect corridor we discussed earlier, shows unmistakable signs of intense heat damage. The walls are discolored in patterns consistent with fire or extreme thermal stress. The limestone has been altered in ways that only happen at high temperatures. Now, limestone doesn't spontaneously combust. There's no natural explanation for fire damage deep inside a sealed stone structure. Unless, of course, something was burning in there. Something like, say, hydrogen gas being ignited in a massive explosion. Remember the Queen's Chamber and its apparent function as a hydrogen production facility? Hydrogen is extremely flammable. Mix it with air in the right proportions and introduce an ignition source, a spark of static electricity perhaps, or a discharge from the piezoelectric system, and you get an explosion. Not a gentle whoosh, but a violent detonation that releases enormous energy in a fraction of a second. The evidence in the Grand Gallery is consistent with exactly this kind of event. A hydrogen explosion that scorched the walls and generated temperatures high enough to alter the stone itself. But the Grand Gallery damage is just the beginning. Move up to the King's Chamber, and the evidence becomes even more dramatic. The massive granite beams that form the ceiling of the chamber, some weighing over 50 tons each, are cracked. Not weathered, not eroded, cracked, as in fractured by force. These are some of the hardest, most durable building materials on Earth, positioned deep inside a protected structure. And they're broken. The cracks run through solid granite in patterns that structural engineers recognize immediately. Stress fractures from sudden, extreme pressure. Even more telling are the walls themselves. The King's Chamber walls have been pushed outward from their original positions by more than an inch in some places. The granite blocks have literally moved, displaced by force applied from inside the chamber. Now think about what it would take to move 50-ton granite blocks that are fitted together with precision measured in fractions of millimeters. Normal settling doesn't do this. Earthquakes don't do this. They cause collapse, not uniform outward displacement. The only thing that pushes walls outward evenly from a central point is an explosion. A big one. The official archaeological explanation for this damage is, predictably, underwhelming. Earthquakes, they say, settling over millennia. Normal structural stress from the weight of the pyramid above. But none of these explanations account for the specific pattern of damage. Earthquakes cause chaotic destruction, not uniform outward pressure. Settling causes downward movement, not lateral displacement. Structural stress from above would push things down, not out. The damage in the King's Chamber is consistent with one thing and one thing only: a massive internal explosion that generated enough pressure to crack granite beams and push stone walls outward against millions of tons of resistance. If the pyramid was an energy device, generating electricity through piezoelectric effects, producing hydrogen through chemical reactions, concentrating electromagnetic energy in its chambers, then the potential for catastrophic failure was built into the system. Any machine that handles significant energy has the potential to malfunction. Power plants have meltdowns. Transformers explode. Batteries catch fire. The more energy involved, the more catastrophic the failure can be. And if our theory is correct, the pyramid was handling enormous amounts of energy, channeled through systems that had to work in perfect harmony to function safely. What could have caused the system to fail? Several possibilities present themselves, but one is particularly compelling: a massive solar event. The sun periodically releases enormous bursts of energy called coronal mass ejections, CMEs, that send waves of charged particles streaming toward Earth. When these particles hit our planet's magnetic field, they can cause all sorts of problems: satellite damage, power grid failures, communication disruptions. In 1859, a CME known as the Carrington event caused telegraph systems worldwide to spark and catch fire, and created auroras visible as far south as the Caribbean. If a similar or larger event happened today, it could knock out electrical infrastructure across entire continents. Now imagine what such an event would do to the pyramid. A massive influx of electromagnetic energy from a solar storm would surge through the pyramid's systems designed to capture and concentrate exactly this type of energy. If the energy input exceeded what the system could handle, the result would be catastrophic overload. The piezoelectric crystals would generate more electricity than the structure could safely contain. The electromagnetic concentration effect would amplify the incoming solar energy to dangerous levels. Any hydrogen in the system would be exposed to electrical discharges far beyond normal parameters. The result? Boom. A chain reaction of failures cascading through the entire structure. Hydrogen igniting in the Grand Gallery. Electromagnetic energy discharging violently in the chambers. Piezoelectric crystals shattering under impossible stress. The whole machine tearing itself apart in a cataclysmic release of all the energy it had been designed to harness. The pyramid wouldn't just stop working, it would destroy itself, and possibly everything nearby. Some researchers have connected this theoretical catastrophe to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the idea that around 10,800 BC, Earth experienced some kind of cosmic disaster that caused rapid climate change and mass extinctions. The timing is intriguing. If an advanced civilization existed before this date, building pyramids and other megalithic structures, a catastrophic event around this time could explain both the end of that civilization and the subsequent dark age before recorded history begins. The pyramid's internal damage might be evidence of this disaster, a moment when the machine overloaded and the civilization that depended on it was destroyed. This is speculative, obviously. We're connecting dots across vast spans of time with limited evidence. But the physical damage inside the pyramid is real. The cracked beams are real. The displaced walls are real. The fire damage is real. Something happened inside that structure, something violent and catastrophic. And the conventional, It's just a tomb explanation offers no plausible cause. The power plant theory, by contrast, explains both the pyramid's design and its destruction. It was a machine, and like all machines, it could fail. When it did, the failure was spectacular. If this scenario is accurate, it adds a tragic dimension to the pyramid story. A civilization advanced enough to build a global wireless energy network, destroyed by their own creation when circumstances beyond their control pushed the system past its limits. Their knowledge lost, their technology forgotten, their greatest achievement standing as a mute monument that future generations would mistake for a tomb, unable to comprehend what it actually was or what had happened to the people who built it. And then, thousands of years later, a Serbian genius would rediscover the same principles, build a similar machine, and face destruction of a different kind, not from cosmic forces, but from human greed. The pattern repeats. The technology emerges. The technology is destroyed. Humanity continues burning fossil fuels and fighting over resources that should have been obsolete millennia ago. So here we are, at the end of our journey through pyramids and power plants, through ancient engineering and modern suppression, through Tesla's dreams and Morgan's greed. And the question that hangs over all of it is simple. Why? Why are we still burning oil and coal and gas when the technology for free energy apparently existed 4,000 years ago? Why did Tesla fail? Why does every inventor who claims to have cracked the free energy problem end up discredited, destroyed, or dead? What is it about unlimited energy that the powers that be find so threatening? Let's start with the numbers, because the numbers tell the story. As of today, approximately 84% of the world's energy comes from fossil fuels. Oil, coal, and natural gas, ancient sunlight compressed into burnable form over millions of years, still power the vast majority of human civilization. This isn't because we lack alternatives. Solar power exists, wind power exists, nuclear power exists, hydroelectric, geothermal, tidal. We have dozens of ways to generate electricity without burning carbon. Yet fossil fuels dominate, and the percentage has barely budged in decades, despite all the talk about green energy and climate change. Why? The cynical answer, which also happens to be the accurate answer, is that fossil fuels are profitable in ways that alternatives aren't. Not because they're cheaper to produce or more efficient to use, but because they're controllable. You can own an oil field. You can meter natural gas. You can charge for every gallon, every cubic foot, every BTU. The scarcity is built in. There's only so much oil in the ground, and whoever controls it controls the money that flows from it. Estimated value of the global fossil fuel industry: somewhere around $7 trillion annually. That's not a typo. $7 trillion every single year, flowing to companies and countries that control the supply of burnable carbon. Now imagine what happens to that $7 trillion if energy becomes free. If anyone can generate unlimited electricity from atmospheric resonance or piezoelectric effects, or zero-point energy, or whatever the actual mechanism turns out to be, the oil companies collapse, the coal companies collapse, the natural gas companies collapse, the utility companies that charge you monthly for electricity collapse. The financial institutions that have invested trillions in fossil fuel infrastructure collapse. The governments that depend on oil revenue collapse. The entire geopolitical order of the modern world, built on controlling energy supplies, collapse. This isn't speculation. This is basic economics. Free energy would be the most disruptive technology in human history, and the people who currently profit from energy scarcity have every incentive to make sure it never happens. They have the money to buy politicians, fund research that discredits alternatives, control media narratives about what's possible and what's fringe science. They have the power to destroy careers, defund projects, and ensure that anyone who gets too close to success meets with obstacles insurmountable or misfortunes inexplicable. Look at the pattern over the past century. Tesla's Wardenclyffe, destroyed. His papers, seized and partially disappeared. Every few years, some inventor announces a breakthrough in free energy technology, and every single time, the same thing happens. Ridicule from the scientific establishment, withdrawal of funding, mysterious debunking that always seems to come from sources with industry connections, and eventually, the quiet disappearance of the technology, and often the inventor. Coincidence? How many coincidences does it take before the pattern becomes undeniable? The pyramid stands in the desert, its secrets locked in stone, its capstone missing, its function forgotten. Tesla lies in an unmarked grave, his greatest work destroyed, his papers hidden, his legacy reduced to a car brand and some internet memes about how cool he was. The technology exists. The physics is real. The proof is literally carved in granite and documented in peer-reviewed journals. Yet here we are, in the 21st century, still paying for electricity, still burning fossil fuels, still pretending that free energy is impossible, despite mounting evidence that it's been achieved at least twice in human history. The question isn't whether free energy is possible. The pyramid suggests it was achieved thousands of years ago. Tesla demonstrated it was achievable with early 20th century technology. Modern physics increasingly confirms that the universe is awash in energy that could theoretically be tapped. The question is whether we'll be allowed to have it. Whether the forces that profit from scarcity will permit the transition to abundance. Whether humanity can overcome the vested interests that have suppressed this technology for over a century, and possibly for millennia before that. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The pyramid builders failed. Tesla failed. Every subsequent attempt has failed. The technology keeps emerging and keeps being suppressed. At some point, you have to wonder if the pattern will ever break. If there will ever come a moment when free energy finally escapes the control of those who fear it, when the pyramid's secrets are finally understood and implemented, when Tesla's dream finally becomes reality. Maybe that moment is coming. The information age has made suppression harder. The 2018 study was published openly, available to anyone with internet access. Alternative theories about the pyramid reach millions of people through YouTube videos like this one. The monopoly on information that allowed Morgan to quietly strangle Tesla no longer exists in the same form. Maybe, just maybe, we're approaching a tipping point where the truth becomes impossible to hide. Or maybe not. Maybe the forces of suppression will adapt. We'll find new ways to discredit and destroy. We'll keep humanity locked in scarcity for another century or another millennium. Maybe the pyramid will continue standing as a monument to forgotten knowledge, and Tesla will remain a tragic figure whose greatest contribution was never allowed to reach the world. I don't know how this story ends. None of us do. But I know how it should end. With humanity finally claiming the birthright that our ancestors achieved and lost, that Tesla nearly restored, that the universe offers freely to anyone wise enough to accept it. Unlimited energy. The end of scarcity. The beginning of an age of abundance that could transform human civilization beyond recognition. The pyramid's secret is out there, waiting to be rediscovered. Tesla's vision is preserved in whatever documents survive the government seizure. The physics is being confirmed by researchers brave enough to ask questions the establishment doesn't want asked. Somewhere, someday, someone will put all the pieces together and succeed where others failed. And when that day comes, the world will change forever. Until then, we wait. We watch. We share information and ask questions and refuse to accept the narrative that free energy is impossible. We honor the memory of Tesla and the unknown builders of the pyramid by refusing to let their work be forgotten. And we hope, maybe naively, maybe foolishly, but genuinely, that the future they tried to create will eventually become the present we get to live. That's the story of the pyramid and Tesla. That's the story of free energy suppressed and secrets hidden. That's the story of what might have been and what might still be. Thanks for joining me on this journey. If this video made you think, made you question, made you wonder about what we've been told versus what might actually be true, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what you think. Is free energy possible, and will we ever be allowed to have it? The pyramid has kept its secrets for 4,000 years. Maybe it's finally time to unlock them.